Oh, I just realized how very dark this angle is. Give me just a second, I'll go turn on a light and let you see my pretty face a little more clearly. Good morning, folks. So, if you saw my Rumble video yesterday, you heard me talking about how evil can be problematic to deal with. That is a massive oversimplification of the issue. In the words of Grady Judd, evil can never be dead enough, and I fully agree with that. For those of you who don't know who Grady Judd is, I recommend you look up Polk County Sheriff, P-O-L-K County Sheriff, in whatever web search software you use, and yeah, he's something. So, following on from that discussion, I had another discussion with another individual today on Discord this morning. I've been up for about an hour or so now. And the topic of the Ukraine-Russian war and the concept of evil came up somewhat connected to one another. And someone pointed out that they believe that Russia is evil in this context. I don't necessarily agree, and here's why. People can be evil. State apparatuses can be evil. The Second World War Germans, for example, were under an evil regime. That should be indisputable to pretty much everyone, given the actions that that regime took. Whether you believe in certain events or not, it is very clear that what they did to their people was not exactly acceptable on a moral standpoint. And certainly anything that follows a socialist philosophy deserves to be, yeeted the fuck into the sun. But, and yes, I do believe that socialism is inherently evil. And that's a topic for another discussion, because what I'm talking about is whether or not the people in a country that's run by an evil state apparatus are themselves evil. And the obvious answer is no, of course not. So, if one, and my feeling about the Ukraine-Russian conflict is that the West should have stayed the fuck out of it. It's not our fight. We never should have gotten involved. There are far too many factors to consider there. The ethnicity of those involved, the obfuscating nature of modern mainstream news, and yes, that does mean that I am calling some news services fake news. Plus, then you have propaganda, which can be extremely difficult when it comes to parsing truth out of it. But my feeling is that the West would have been better served by simply staying out of the conflict and allowing it to resolve between two sovereign nations, in whatever fashion that happened to occur. The problem is, interventionism has been a very big problem with the West for decades, potentially even more. And there is a massive difference between colonialism and interventionism. With colonialism, you are replacing a government. You go in, you remove a government, and you replace it with your own. In interventionist approaches, you remove a government, but you don't necessarily replace it. You perhaps provide the people the ability to replace their government with one that you approve of, but you're still running the risk that they won't, or that the new government, when your support is removed, fails, which also happens in decolonialism. When you take the colonial power away, as we saw in Africa, Asia, if you count Hong Kong, when you take away the influence of the colonizing force, that generally leads to a state of chaos, at least for a short time. And there has been massive Western interference in the Ukraine for some time. Whether you believe that the U.S. actually installed Zelensky or not, which I don't necessarily believe that, but I don't necessarily dispute it either. I'm not particularly well educated in the field. Okay. The discussion basically started at this point. If Russia is evil, then the West should be compelled to do everything possible to destroy Russia. No. My standpoint about evil is an interpersonal thing, because evil cannot be done by anything other than an individual or a group of individuals working together. The idea that Russia is doing something evil, I am willing to grant the possibility. I'm not willing to say it is a definite thing. But, and there are points to be made on either side, it's a complex issue. It's a complex, it's a complex issue. It's a complex event. But the example I used yesterday, and I do apologize, I did make this a Rumble exclusive video yesterday, mostly because some of what I said probably would have triggered YouTube's algorithm to strike me, or at least flag me as inciting violence, which I was not. But, and I'm still not, for the record, I don't encourage any violence. But when it comes to an international conflict, it is very difficult to parse the correct action out of multiple options, especially when the issue becomes clouded by previous interventionism, but the basic premise that I was arguing from is this. Countries are not evil because countries are not people. Countries are a form of construct or concept, and thereby are, if not necessarily morally neutral, they are essentially amoral, as countries themselves do not take actions. To collectivize the entire populace of a country as a country, for example, to say all of Burma is evil. I'll use Burma because it's a term that's not used anymore. Okay, let me do it this way. In Dungeons and Dragons, there's a mechanism that I use when I DM. And I'll name a place Insmere, which is short form for insert name here, or Insmere, or Inzer, or whatever. I'll use some form of that if I'm having trouble coming up with a name for a town or a place. So if Insmere, for example, attacks Odehr, and that's going to be short for over there. So Insmere and Odehr. Okay, we'll assume these two countries are having some sort of conflict. People in Odehr and people in Insmere may perceive the other country as evil, and may therefore think that everyone in the other country deserves to be destroyed, because they are dehumanizing the populace, which happens quite often. But if Insmere and Odehr are left alone, they will sort the shit out. Now, it may end up that Insmere completely overwhelms Odehr, or Odehr may completely overwhelm Insmere. And either way, the issue is solved. Now, if Insmere and Odehr have treaties with other countries, the other countries may choose to get involved. That's fine. The other countries may in fact even be beholden to get involved. They may be required to get involved by those treaties. That would be fine. However, if you have a secret cabal of wizards who are trying to influence the outcome to their benefit by, say, financing Odehr, or providing Odehr with magical weapons, or soldiers, or training, or whatever, then it's no longer Insmere fighting Odehr. It's Insmere fighting Odehr and their allies, or their influences, their backers. And in that instance, who's evil? Is it Odehr for taking help against Insmere? Is it the people helping Odehr against Insmere? Is it Insmere for continuing to fight, even though there's an obvious organization beyond Odehr that they're fighting? How does one know? Which is why, in my opinion, it's better for countries to stay out of it. Sovereign countries that have disputes with one another, they need to sort their shit out. It's my feeling. Now, to call either Odehr or Insmere evil as a collective, and this is where the thrust of my issue comes from, that's wrong. You can't call... Collectivization is wrong, first off. Because if you collectivize an entire group of people, you stop treating them as people, which is dehumanizing. Or dehumanization. And there is nothing more evil than dehumanizing a group of people. Because when you dehumanize a group of people, you make anything that you do to that group of people virtuous and acceptable. That's why I have such a problem with the collectivization, or collectivizing terms like black, white, left, right. When you only treat people as parts of their collective, then you take away the basic human aspect of them. In the same way that a mob can be absolutely unreasonable, while the people within it, if you could separate them from the mob, might actually be reasonable, treating an international conflict as if it is a very simple thing where one side is evil, one side is good, generally you end up with some serious problems. There's a reason we take prisoners of war, because we do not assume that every single opponent, every single enemy combatant is evil. We assume either that they're patriotic and following orders, or that they may be forced in the case of conscription. So you cannot collectivize a people that way. Is it unfortunate that it may end up that a bad power overcomes another power? Sure. But for all we know, and I'll go back to Odehr and Insmere again, for all we know, Odehr is being run by an absolute tyrant, and Insmere is being run by an absolute tyrant. Okay, so which of the two absolute tyrants do you want to support? And it's quite possible that Odehr or Insmere, either one of them, could have gangs of bards roaming the countryside, spreading rumors about evil things that one side or the other has done. Propaganda. How do you parse the truth? To put it on an individual level, you go to the bar, you see two people fighting. Who picked the fight? Well, yeah, you may have seen Billy. Let's go with Billy and Bob. So, Billy and Bob. Billy appears to have picked the fight with Bob. Okay, so the natural inclination there is to go, well, okay, Billy was out of line and shouldn't have picked that fight. But for all you know, Bob fucked Billy's wife. Or Bob kicked Billy's dog. You don't know. So you're better off staying out of it. That's an extremely long-winded way to say that I don't think international conflicts between two sovereign powers should be interfered with. But that's how I feel. Anyway, folks, hopefully I couched that in vague enough language that I won't catch a strike, but in clear enough language that you got my point. But at the very bottom end, my very basic point is, people can be evil. Countries are generally amoral. Or non-moral, I suppose, since they're not really moral actors. Amoral tends to sound like they're being evil, but that's immoral as opposed to amoral. Language is a tricky fucking thing. Anyway, I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. Rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.